Hi, guys. Welcome to another Monday night study. Tonight, we're going to continue going through the Ezra Apocalypse because there's some really interesting prophecy things that I want to cover, especially in light of what's going on in the world. So, we gave the chapters 1 and 2 a brief introduction last week, which gave us the idea of the different pieces to it, how the church fathers accepted it, and just a general outline of end time history is what chapters 1 and 2 do, about Israel coming back. We saw a pre-tribulational rapture, 7-year tribulation, things like that, briefly anyway. So this time we're going to go into some moral issues, and then next time hit a very interesting, it's almost a timeline prophecy, but it helps to understand things, especially pulling together the calendar. The Dead Sea Scroll calendar, I think, is the key to all of these things, so we can see patterns of God moving through history. Before I get to tonight's study, though, there's one thing I wanted to share with you. Some of you guys know that I'm going through retranslating or making a modern English version of Eusebius, and we've mentioned a few of those in the last couple of times. Well, today I was going through this, and this is book 6. It's 10 books, ancient church history. Book number 6. Chapter 25 is about Clement of Alexandria, some of the stuff that he did. And there's a section here on the kind of Old Testament that he has. Almost everybody says, yeah, I have, Genesis, Exodus, things like that. So this is what's really interesting here. He has a list of 22 books, and there's several different books in different orders in the Septuagint family. In the Hebrew family, I was aware of just one. They separated it into 24 books. We have 39. It's the same 39 books that we have, but they group pieces together. His is 22, and it comes from a Hebrew group. So it's not Pharisee, Sadducee. Maybe it's Essene. We have all these books in the Essene catalog, but we don't have a catalog per se telling us what they considered scripture and what they didn't. So this might be it too. But notice what he does. It's almost a chart, basically. They didn't have charts per se, but the first book in the Old Testament, he says, is Genesis. And it's called Bereshit by the Hebrews. So that's the Hebrew name of it. And it means in the beginning. So he's going to give you like our name, their name, the definition, and then any other information that goes along with it. So in their 22 books, he's got Genesis and then Exodus, which is Shemot, meaning these are the names, just goes down that way. Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua. And then something that surprised me right here, it says Judges and Ruth are Shophatim in one book. So Shophatim means judges. So in my mind, it's the book of Judges, which is what the normal modern Hebrew Bible has for them. And Ruth is a separate book. Well, in this canon, for some reason, Judges and Ruth are together as the Shophatim. Now, Ruth was in the time of the Judges, so it makes perfect sense that you would put it there. It's a side story in the Judges period. But that means one less book in the catalog. So it's kind of interesting. So then they have 1st and 2nd Kings, and this is along with the Septuagint or the Catholic versions. They all have 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th Kings, and then 1st and 2nd Chronicles. We just call them 1st and 2nd Samuel and 1st and 2nd Kings. Okay. Well, they have 1st and 2nd Kings, which they call Shmuel or Samuel, and then they have 3rd and 4th Kings, which they call the Kingdom of David. That makes sense. It's David's stuff. So then they have 1st and 2nd Chronicles, which they call it the records of the days. So this is one book, that's one book. So it's 3 books in these 6 books. They just put them all together. Kind of makes sense. All of Samuel should go together. All of Chronicles should go together. All of Kings should go together. Except it's a huge book if we did that. So they want to break it up into other ones. But now look at this. This is interesting. Number 11. First off, let me give you the history. And I think I mentioned this last time or the time before. But the Ezra Apocalypse, or Ezra anyway, in the Greek canon, Ezra is called Esdras. So this word right here, Esdras. So they tack an S on the end, and the SD is a Z sound. So it's Esdras or Ezra. So what happens is when you're looking at these things, there are some manuscripts that have first Ezra and second Ezra. And when you look at the text, it's actually Ezra and Nehemiah. And then there are some of them that have first Esdras, which is a copy of Ezra complete, and then a copy of Nehemiah complete. And then there's others that have a kind of a harmony of the Gospels type thing where the two are combined. Because in Ezra and Nehemiah both, there's large sections of who came back and how much goods they brought back, and it's basically the same. There's a whole lot that's identical. So most of the manuscripts then would have first Ezra, which is Ezra and Nehemiah put together, and second Ezra, which is the Apocalypse. Well, depending on how you do this, you could have, and I've seen these actually, first Ezra is Ezra, second Ezra is Nehemiah, third Ezra is Ezra and Nehemiah put together, compact form, and then fourth Ezra is the Apocalypse. So it's really confusing that time. And what I never realized before is we don't have first and second Judges and first and second this, and this one might be this. Every time they do that, it's because somebody's tried to make something disappear. Like when we have all of the rulers, all the judges and all the kings up until the time of the 400 silent years, then all of a sudden it's this guy's Samuel, unless it's something else, and it could be this guy's uncle or his son. Nobody really knows for sure. It's somebody, and that's the kind of where it was left. And and again, you should stop and think about it. How can they keep perfect records up until that time, and then after that time they keep perfect records? Why didn't they at this time? Well, obviously they did. Somebody's trying to mess with something. Anyway, so with that in mind, look at what it says. Ezra's first and the second one. Okay. Now at that point, you might think, oh, okay, so this is Ezra and Nehemiah, right? Okay, that would be because there's a couple manuscripts like that. But notice what he says: Ezra's the first one and the second one, comma, Ezra, that is, not Nehemiah, Ezra. So if Nehemiah is out of the picture, then that means first Ezra is Ezra and Nehemiah put together, the combination, and second Ezra is the Apocalypse. So this fascinated me. I've never seen a Hebrew canon with the Ezra Apocalypse in it. I mean, or listed like this. And then it goes on, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Songs, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Daniel, Ezekiel, and then they have Job and Esther. So he says, and I thought that was interesting too, because up the top he says there are 22 books, 22. He gives us a list of 21, the way he codes it, but the minor prophets aren't in here. So somehow he left off the minor prophets. And then it says, besides these, there's the books of Maccabees and other things. And then he starts talking about the New Testament, what he has in the New Testament for his canon. Anyway, I just thought I was fascinated with that today when I learned that. And Jeremiah, for instance, is Jeremiah that we know, plus Lamentations put together as one book, plus the Epistle of Jeremiah, which we usually put in the Apocrypha. But all these are together in one book. Pretty interesting. So someone asked me the other day about the Apocrypha not belonging in the Old Testament canon. And the question was, in the Catholic version, they're all separate, or like the King James, they're all separate. But what about the additions to Daniel, the additions to Esther? Are they in the Apocrypha part, or are they in the actual book part? And I don't know for sure. According to this, at least one of them with Jeremiah, you have that. And there's some other stuff with Jeremiah and the Dead Sea Scrolls too. But I just wanted mainly to bring that to our attention. Ezra's the first and the second, and then you're assuming Ezra and Nehemiah. So the second one, and that is Ezra also. So the Apocalypse is what we're talking about. So just fascinating. I just thought that was pretty interesting. So that's like 3 or 4 different references to the book through the church fathers, and a handful of quotes. So we talked about some of those quotes last week. So today we're going to look at mainly chapter 3, but a little piece of chapter 4, because it kind of goes together. And then next week we're going to look at a prophecy and dig into it, take some time with it at the end of chapter 4, second half of chapter 4. So here is chapter 3, and it's talking about the sin nature in Israel and the questions. All of the rabbis, all of the people, and you see this in the minor prophets and all over, they get upset about the way things are. And like, Lord, this is not glorifying to your name. It's not glorifying to us. We have to suffer because this is whatever. And the Lord basically comes back and says, I have a plan, and your desires are not necessarily my plan. Just follow the plan. And they usually give some sort of a really good idea on this. So look at this. This is Ezra talking. And in most of the text, it has 30 years. One or two of the text has 130. And we'll see it's obviously 130. If we go to or understand that the city of Jerusalem fell to Nebuchadnezzar in 597 BC. Then 20 years later, or 10 years later, in 587 BC, the temple was destroyed. So he's probably talking about from the fall of our city. Probably the temple is probably the one that he would say temple, so it's probably 597. But from the fall of the city, it was either 597 or 587, depending on how he's looking at this. So 130 years later, that puts us in either 467 or 457. And most of these things date, Ezra is writing his epistle coming to Jerusalem in the neighborhood of 458. So give or take a year of that. So that makes it's pretty interesting. I think I have that down here. Yeah, should be about 458 BC is what most people have on their calendars. So that's give or take a year. So he could have went there and then a year into, he'd been here 6, 7, 8 months, and he has this this thing that he writes. So it's 130 years after the fall of our city. I was in Babylon, laying on my bed, and my mind was troubled because I saw the desolation of Zion and the wealth of those who dwelt at Babylon. And my spirit was grieved, and I began to fearfully pray to the Most High. And I said, O Lord, who rules all, you spoke at the beginning, when you yourself alone formed the earth by commanding the dust. You gave a body to Adam with a soul, which was your workmanship of your hands, and you breathed on him the breath of life, and he became a living soul before you. You led him to paradise, your right hand had planted before the earth ever came forward. According to the other text, he was formed in a land called Eldon, moved into the Garden of Eden, but is what he's talking about. But anyway, you gave him, Adam, the commandment to love your way, but he transgressed it, and you immediately appointed death for him and for his descendants. From him were born all the nations, tribes, peoples, and clans. The nations all devised their own corrupt ideas and despised your commandments. But in the process of time, you brought forth a flood on the inhabitants of the earth and destroyed them. In the same way in the same way that Adam received death, they also received the flood. Nevertheless, you spared one of them, namely Noah, with his household, for whom all the righteous are descended. Then he goes on and says, when the inhabitants of the earth began to multiply and had many children, and they were a great people, they became more ungodly than the former generations. When they lived so wickedly before you, you chose a man from among them whose name was Abraham. You loved him. You showed him your will, or showed your will only to him. You made an everlasting covenant with him, promising him that you would never forsake his seed. You gave him Isaac, and to Isaac you gave Jacob and Esau, and you chose Jacob for a heritage. Esau you hated, and Jacob became a great multitude. And of course, Esau was hated because he chose evil. And there's a whole historical text about Esau and the kind of things that he did. Pretty evil. When you led his seed out of Egypt, you brought them to Mount Sinai. You rolled back the heavens, shook the earth, made the world to quake, and caused the depths to tremble, and alarmed the men of that age. Your glory shone forth in the fire, earthquake, wind, and the cold. You gave the law to Jacob's seed, and the commandments to that generation of Israel. Yet you did not remove their evil heart, that your law might produce fruit in them. For the first Adam clothed himself with an evil heart and transgressed, and was overcome. And also all of those who were descended from him received an evil heart. And we all have a God nature. We also have a sin nature. And most of the time, the sin nature overwhelms the God nature. And we're not talking about a new birth yet. This is something like yet future, but that happened. It says that that infirmity or that sin or that transgression or that genetic problem, whatever you want to call it, the problem, remained in them. And the law, together with the root of evil, caused what was good to depart, and the evil remained. It's okay. So far, so good. So the times passed away, the seasons ended. You raised up for yourself a servant named David, whom you commanded to build a city for your name and cause your people to offer incense and obligations therein. This was done for many years. But after a time, the inhabitants of the city sinned against you. They did nothing new beyond what Adam and all his generations had done, for they also clothed themselves with an evil heart. So you delivered your city into the hands of your enemies. Are the deeds of the Babylonians any better, that they should have dominion over Zion? And you've got to be careful asking God questions like that. But this is the idea. Everybody sins. These guys were probably the best. I mean, we're all sinners, but there are some nations that are really horrible. These guys were actually pretty good by comparison. So almost like saying, is it right that you take the good guys just because they're not perfect and make them enslaved to one of the worst guys? Humanly, it doesn't make any sense. I would have done it totally differently, but God has a plan. So that's the question. And he goes on and he gives an explanation why he asked the question. Since I have been here, my soul has seen so many ungodly deeds. So much evil has been done in these past 130 years, or maybe 30 years, that I am sick of heart. Just can't take it anymore. For I have seen how you suffer the sinners, spare the ungodly. You've destroyed your people and preserved your enemies. You have not revealed to anyone how your way may be truly followed. Has Babylon actually behaved better than Zion? Is there any other people who know you and follow you better than Israel? Or what tribe has believed your covenant as Jacob has? Yet they have no reward, and their labor has borne no fruit. For I see the heathen are wealthy, but are unmindful of your commandments. Now weigh our iniquities and those of the heathen in a balance, and it will manifest that your name is found nowhere except Israel. Now, he's not wrong in any of this. This is from a human standpoint, and it's all true. And a human looks at this and says, I have a problem. I'm just, something's got to give here, something like that. And God's going to answer this. So weigh it. And even with all their bad, they're still better. And I can see this in the United States too, where we say, like, there's so many things we've done bad. Absolutely true. One of the things that I've thought about, though, is out of all the people that actually create Bibles, the American and the British Bible Societies put out probably 80% of the Bibles. So, I mean, I could use the same argument. It's like, yeah, we're not very good, but who else puts out your word? I mean, give us some slack here. That's the kind of argument he's making. And it's not wrong, it's true, but there's a little more to the story. When have the men of the earth not sinned before you? Has that ever happened? And the answer is no. What people have kept your commandments more than Israel? You will find that only Israel has kept your commandments, or at least tried to most of the time, and done, because they tried, they did better than anybody else did. Not very good, but better. None of the heathen have even ever tried. Okay, makes perfect sense because the sin nature. So now we want to look at a couple of these. God basically says, I'm going to answer your question if you can answer me 3 questions. So there's 3 challenges. So then the Lord sent the angel Uriel to me. And he said, why is your heart so confused by this world that you think you can comprehend the way of the Most High? Now, again, not angry or anything, not being bad, mean, but it's an honest question. You have no clue what's going on out there. And especially, we're the same way. If we've never been there, we don't know. We have a good idea from what we see, but we could be being lied to. And we have a God nature. We want truth and justice and the American way and that kind of stuff. But at the same time, we have a sin nature, and we don't do the things we want to do sometimes. So that's the question. Why is your heart so confused by this world that you think you can actually comprehend the way of the Most High? And even the angels can't quite do that. I have been sent to show you 3 ways and give you 3 examples. Okay. If you can explain one of these to me, I will show you the way which you long to see, and I will teach you where the evil heart comes from. No sense of trying to explain it to somebody that can't understand it. Not that he won't, he's a good guy, but he's so in grief and everything right now, he can't think straight. So I answered and said, please go on, my Lord. So 3 questions. Okay, let's see if we can answer them. He said to me, can you weigh fire or measure wind or recall the day that has passed? Not recall like remember, but can you go back a day and change it? Can you measure the wind? Can you weigh fire? I mean, maybe technically, scientifically, we could weigh fire, today, but maybe not. Anyway, so he said, no man is able to do any of these things. Why would you even ask such a thing? It's obviously not possible. He said to me, if I had asked you how many chambers are in the midst of the sea, because he's never been in the sea, or how many springs are at the beginnings of the deep, or how much water is there above the firmament, or what are the outlets of Sheol? Like when the resurrection happens, where do they come from? Where exactly is it? Well, I don't know. I've never been there. So, or what are the paths of paradise? Have you ever actually went into Eden or into paradise and come back? Do you know how to get there? Could you take me there? And the answer is no. He's never been to any of these places. If I had asked you some of those, you would have said to me, I've never been to the deep, Sheol, or heaven. But now I have not asked you concerning these things, but only concerning the fire, the wind, and the day, things which you know about and see daily, yet you cannot tell me anything about them. So he's really getting him to understand now there are things out there that you have no clue about. And I know you're upset, but you're so upset you're focused on one thing and you're not seeing anything else. So he said to me, if you're incapable of understanding the things that you grow up with, just normal life stuff, if you are incapable of understanding that, how then can your mind comprehend the way of the Most High? It is not possible that that one who is corruptible and in a corruptible world could completely understand the way of him who is incorruptible. That makes sense too. Then I said to him, I just meant it would be better for us if we hadn't even existed than to live and sin and suffer and not know why we suffer. Okay. And the reason they're not knowing why they suffer is because they don't look at the scriptures. Now, he makes a comment later that the scriptures had been destroyed. So, like the full record of the Bible is probably still back in Jerusalem, but with them in Babylon, where they're at, they can't find a Bible. Okay. So, that's one thing. But has anybody really tried? I mean, obviously, there's not one there, but can you get permission to go somewhere, do something? Can you find or get everybody together that remembers it, write it down? Have you even tried to do something like that? No, you're preoccupied with the suffering, which is understandable. I mean, I'm not saying that I would be any better than him, but the principle is this. He's saying, okay, I get it, but I just meant to say it'd be better if I'd never been born. For whom? If God has a plan for your life, it's better that you are born. And maybe you just sit and wait for 50 or 100 years. But there is a plan. So then he gives another example. And this is pretty interesting. This is my favorite little take on it, because we see trees and oceans and stuff all through the prophecies. Usually trees are nations, and a sea is all the Gentiles put together, usually when they're coming against Israel or something like that. But he answered me and said, I'll give you another parable here. It's fiction, obviously, so just go with me on this. Once the trees of a forest took counsel together and said, come, let us make war with the sea, push it back, make it recede for us, so we can make us more woods. Just like a normal empire, I want that, I'm just going to push them out of the way, take them over, conquer them, that kind of thing. Humans can do that. One nation can attack another and take it over if they're strong enough. But he doesn't say that about people, so you can see the point he's making. This is a forest of trees. They're going to try to push the water back. Now, you try to push water back, what happens? It goes around your barrier, and it's always going to be the right level. You're not going to be able to push it down and make a hole in the water like you could a hole in the earth. So that's what it says. Now, the waves of the sea likewise deliberated together and said, come, let us wage war with the forest so we can create another sea. Well, water is at a certain level. The forest is up on an island. Just think of it as an island with trees on it, and then the ocean. The ocean is never going to be able to get up over that island. Okay, so it's not possible. So it says, the counsel of the wood was vain, for a fire came and consumed it. So the trees are going to get together and attack and destroy the ocean. The ocean is going to come together and attack and destroy the forest. And while they're plotting all this, a storm came up. Lightning struck, burned up the forest. No more forest, no more trees. So, and of course, that's Israel, the sea of Gentiles and the trees of the forest. So it says, likewise, also, the deliberation of the waves of the sea was stopped, basically, for the sand stood up and stopped them. You just can't get over the sand or through the sand. So with that parable in mind, he says, if you were to judge between these two, there are two armies, the kingdom of the trees and the kingdom of the water, you're going to judge between them. Somebody's right, somebody's wrong, most likely. If you were to judge between these two, which one would you justify and which one would you condemn? This is interesting to me. Recently, over this last year, I've found out that one of the tricks of Satan is to tell you something bad is coming. And you have one of two options. There's only two options out of this one and that one. Now, they're both sin, but you got to do what you got to do. So pick the lesser of two evils, that kind of thing. And it's a trick of Satan. The answer is to say, no, I'm going to do what God told me to do. I'm not going to pick the lesser of anything. And usually when you do that, you're told you're going to die then because they're going to come and kill you or take you off to jail or whatever. And if you have the attitude, that's not my problem. I'm going to do what God told me to do. And if he lets me go to jail, then he lets me to go to jail. That's his problem. He takes care of me. I'm not going to worry about it. But I'm not going to sin. That kind of thing. So this is kind of the same thing. It's like, well, obviously there's a winner and a loser. Somebody's right, somebody's wrong. Which one's right, which one's wrong? Trick question. And he understands that. He says, I answered saying, both were foolish. For the land has been given to the trees, and the sea has its place to bear its waves. The sea wouldn't even be able to survive up here on land. The trees would drown in the water. It's a moot point. It's ridiculous. So it can't be. They're both wrong. So he answered me and said, you have judged well. That's good. You saw through it. So why don't you judge yourself in the same way? Just as the land was given to the wood and the sea for its waves, those who dwell upon the earth are able to understand only what's on the earth. And he who is above in the heavens can understand the things of heaven. So, and we're not up there, so we can't. So I answered, and I say, basically, he answered, there's an alarm going off somewhere. Okay, anyway, and I answered, I pray you, my Lord, grant me understanding. So help me to understand this. For I have not thought about the way that is above, but only those things which pass over us daily. For Israel is given up to the heathen, and the people that you loved are given into a godless nation, and the holy law of our fathers is no more. The written covenants have been made of none effect. We pass from the world as locusts. Our life is full of fear. We are not worthy to obtain your mercy. What will he do for his great name by which we are called? About these things I have asked. And he answered and said, the more you search, the more you will marvel, because the world is quickly passing away. World, I probably should have translated that age, time period. It cannot bear what has been promised to the righteous in the time to come, because this world is full of unrighteousness and infirmities. We'll stop there for tonight. The next part continues with another moral example, same kind of stuff, but it drifts into prophecy. You know, when he finally understands, okay, I get it. Now we can look back at this and say, okay, I understand. Israel was bad. The way they were going, there would have been no Messiah. That's necessary. It doesn't matter if you have a good life or a bad life. You'll have a good life in heaven. It doesn't matter if you're in the land or out of the land. What matters is the Messiah. So if it's going down the wrong direction, the Lord steps in and fixes the problem. So he's concerned with his people, thinking about that right now. If you go back and look, study the prophecies, you can kind of study morality and study history. He mentioned David and everybody, so he knew everybody. What happened when David had an affair with Bathsheba and to cover it up got her husband killed? What about Solomon building the temples for his wives? The temples of baby sacrifice. What about this? What about that? I'm sure you'd say, well, yeah, that needed to be stopped. Well, it's been stopped. Of course, the question is, what goes on now? Well, the Lord will fix it in the right time. The reason he's doing this stuff is to make sure the Messiah comes. Okay. Right now, the things that are being set up are for Israel to come back to the Lord, to recognize their Messiah, and for us to begin to trust him. We see all these things going on around us and we're scared. Is there going to be an invasion, an army, a society, a stock market crash? Are money going to go away? Are we going to have food? All those kind of things. He'll take care of us, but at the same time, his plans are the most important. Anyway, we'll stop there because it's a really interesting thing that comes up. And he talks about the evil and everything. The point that he gives in the next part is, if evil is so ingrained and it has to be stopped before righteousness can come, and you can't stop it, then those people have to be wiped out. And you're not looking at that, you're just looking at people, and you don't see the whole picture. So many places in the scrolls and in the church fathers talk about the whole idea of God as a plan. When something comes and you don't understand it, you don't want it, you don't understand why it has to be this way, to look at it and realize the Lord has a plan, and maybe it'll change in your lifetime and maybe it won't, but there is a plan, and eventually it's going to be worked out. And that we are to trust that everything that happens in our lives are for his plan. Like a lot of times we'd think like, well, why did I get in an accident? Now I'm in the hospital. Maybe it's to witness to somebody there in the hospital. That kind of a thing. We shouldn't be saying, woe is me, why do I have to go through this? But what can I do in this situation? So anyway, we'll stop there. He's going to come up with a third one, and then a really interesting set of prophecies, some numbers we can actually put together on the calendar and see what's going on. So let's stop there for tonight, and we'll go to the chat room and see if there's any questions. There's a handful of questions. All right, let's see here. Patrick asks, are there legitimate messianic and end times prophecies recorded outside the canon of Scripture, in the DSS, for example? I would say yes. We're going to see some of them in this one. Why do you suppose that God didn't include them within the Bible? I don't know for sure, but there could be many reasons for it. One thing that I've often thought of, we always read the Bible and say, I'd like to know more about this or that, or who was that guy that went through there and there's no data on it. Well, actually, there is probably in other places. But we talk about how you need to read the Bible, understand it in order to be saved. I mean, you don't have to understand everything, but 66 books are actually pretty large for a lot of people to read. Now, suppose everybody knew about the Old and the New Testaments, all of the church fathers, all of the Dead Sea Scrolls, all the extra writings, and they were all put together. Like we're going to see in here, Ezra, when he wrote the Targums, he wrote the Targums of all what we would call 39 books. They call it 22 or 24, but the Old Testament, faithfully translated into Aramaic. And then he also did the same thing for the other 70, which are the writings of the ancients. So probably the Targums and other things. So those are really important too. But if we had all of these together, number one, I'm sure there's a lot of people that are going to say, if I have to actually read a 40-volume encyclopedia or a 100-volume encyclopedia to begin to figure out how to get saved, I'm just toast. And they would just walk away. So we need to have a finite version. And like Peter said, the scriptures, everything in the scriptures, just the 66, are all you need for a life of godliness and for salvation. So it's all we really, really need. But the other things are important. Another thing could be, if we all had all of the prophecies, then we would know exactly. For instance, if you knew exactly 100% without any reservation who the harlot system is of Revelation, what the 10 nations are, who the 10 nations are, and like that, the things that we try to figure out, if those had been well known for 1,000 years, I can guarantee you this world would be quite a bit different. So right now we know that Israel is blessed of God and will eventually inherit the land and the prophecies and stuff. And the Arab nations coming from Esau don't want that. Just that alone, just knowing that alone, has caused the Arab-Israeli conflict, which has been horrible. So I'm just saying that. Now in the book of Enoch and in a few other places, it talks about this is for that last generation. And there will be a canon that the righteous live their life by, a set of books. And these books are not to be put in the canon. So those are two possible reasons. There may be a lot of other reasons, but for some reason the Lord allowed that. Now, my ministry, I've always loved digging these things up, and I think you're interested or you wouldn't be here. And so I'm interested in looking at these things. This is the end times. So if we can get this other stuff, we need to at least have the genealogies in case we want to look something up, figure out something, all the names of all the old names for the countries to figure out the prophecies and the like. So it's really important, and the prophecies talk about other prophecies coming toward the end times, old things being discovered and things like that. So yeah, there's real historical records outside of the Bible. That's obvious, but I mean, just going down the list, there are real prophetic books outside the Bible, most of which in the Dead Sea Scrolls are all about the first coming. Like for instance, one of them I like to mention is during the first coming, there is a prophecy that when the Jews kill the Messiah, God will reject the priesthood. Now, I don't know if that's like 5 minutes into it or a year after or whatever, but that's just what it says. The sign, though, that God rejects the priesthood is that he would literally tear the veil of the temple in half. And that's not really humanly possible. Somebody could come in like Romans and burn it by fire or something, but that thing is like 2 foot thick, supposedly. You can't just rip that in half. But that's one of the prophecies, not in the Bible, but in the scrolls. And I think it's interesting how Matthew is going down the list going, this prophecy was fulfilled, this one, and this one. Oh yeah, and the temple was ripped in half. And this prophecy, and he just goes on. He just throws it in there in the midst of prophecies. And you're like, okay, that it almost seems like it's got something to do with prophecies, but it's not a prophecy in the Bible. But if you were in a scene, it would have slapped you in the face. So lots of interesting things to talk about, but those are just suppositions, like you're saying, that why God wouldn't put certain things in the Bible. I think we don't want a 100-volume encyclopedia to start with. And that's why I always tell people, just kind of devour the New Testament. And me personally, I love to devour the epistles of Paul and then the general epistles with it. That's kind of where my heart is. It's always been from even before I knew the records. My old pastor, Pastor Rick, always loved the Gospels, or not the Gospels, the book of Acts. Everything should point back to the book of Acts, how you run a church. Another pastor friend of ours was always about the Gospels. He spent most of his time going back over the Gospels constantly. And so it's interesting, everybody's driven to different parts of the Bible. And then I found out later that the Dead Sea Scrolls predict a second canon when the Messiah comes the first time. It's going to contain prophecy from the Messiah himself, like Matthew 24. And it's going to have a record of how the new age began, book of Acts. And then it's going to have a set of epistles, among other things, but a set of epistles written by some Benjamite. And in those epistles are the answers to all of the questions about the ages and the turnover and salvation and stuff like that. Someone asked me recently about some guy who was a Christian that left it, and now he's saying Paul's apostate and Jesus meant we save ourselves through meditation, that kind of stuff. And I see that among some of the hyper Hebrew roots groups. They throw Paul out. But it's funny to see the Dead Sea Scrolls say, no, all the answers to everything that you need is in the epistles of Paul. So that's pretty fantastic. So that's a really good question. I can't really answer that one part. Yes, there are several. Next question. Will the war of Gog and Magog occur before the 7 years of the tribulation? I'm not really sure. In my thought, they do. The way I pull the scriptures together, and I'm guessing like everybody else does, there's a 7-year period, and that's attached to the end. And the way I'm looking at it, and we're going to see this in chapters 11 and 12 of this book, and then there's another manuscript called the Seventh Vision of Daniel. We haven't looked at that yet. But you put those together, and it paints the picture of the Roman Empire splitting up. Now, evidently, they split into East and West, which becomes Holy Roman Empire, which basically becomes Germany, and then Byzantine Empire, which becomes Ottoman Empire. And then they're totally destroyed as an empire. 1917 tries to come back, and then were destroyed again with World War II, 1 and 2. So by 45, it looks like the empire is pretty much over. But according to these prophecies, there's like one more round of the empire. And what happens is when the Ottoman Empire, not the Ottoman, but the Byzantine part of the empire fell, it's possible, according to some of these writings, that the Caesar line, went from Rome, went to Constantinople, and then when Constantinople fell in 1453, it went to Russia, making the Russian Empire the last head of the Roman Empire. So if that's the case, Roman Empire is still kind of here. They don't talk about it much these days, but it's that kind of thing. So if that's the way God sees it, Russia ends up attacking Europe, getting, not necessarily nuking them or anything, but basically kind of takes over, is able to force its way, and then attacks Israel. So if Israel is attacked and God destroys it supernaturally at that point, then the empire is completely gone, which allows probably very quickly 10 nations that are somewhat unaffected to pull together and create some sort of a democratic global union type thing. And it doesn't work because there's 10. So every time they vote, they can't do anything until an 11th one comes in, and that's the Antichrist. So that's kind of the way I see the prophecies. So if that's the way it happens, then the Gog-Magog war is definitely before the 7-year tribulation. It may just be, who knows, a few months or it could be a number of years, but sometime before. Now, other people, though, have thought the Gog and Magog invasion is the same thing as the Battle of Armageddon, which would place it at the end. Dave Hunt taught that, I remember. So there's a couple of different theories on that. We'll get to those prophecies too. When does the day of the Lord officially begin? The day of the Lord, in my mind, is the 7-year tribulation period, the day of Jacob's trouble, or the day of the Lord. Other people try to say it's actually the millennial reign or the two put together, since they're back to back. The only thing I can say to that, I think it's the tribulation period, but sometime in the near future, there's a Shemitah, a 7-year period, and that ends with the start of the millennial reign. So it's all up there together. So the only thing we can really say is there's no gap between the 7-year period and the millennial reign. The idea is that the 7-year period would probably be a lot longer if it's not interrupted by the second coming. So those are good questions. In Luke 16:16, do you think Jesus is referring to the changing of the age of Torah to the age of grace, from the law of the prophets were until John, when the gospel of the kingdom was proclaimed, that many are forcing into? That particular verse, I think so. I think he's referring to that in particular. looking at the scrolls and then looking back at this, I see it as the law and the prophets prophesied until John. And John, of course, anointed or the Messiah as king, priest, prophet, which would officially start everything. He could start the age of grace at that point. It was before the age of grace began. So according to the timeline, it was much like around 28 or something. Then he had a 3-year ministry and stuff. But at that point, it talks about those take the kingdom by force. And I think that was referring to the last 100 years or so of the Pharisee-Sadducee war, taking everything by force. Because the scrolls teach that everyone has always believed we have a sin nature, we're destined for hell. The Messiah, who's God incarnate, will come and somehow fix it, has something to do with him getting killed, but it pays the penalty for our sin nature and reconciles us to God. And even some of the manuscripts, like 11Q13, one of the Dead Sea Scrolls, talks about the date it would happen. And it actually gives the date on the calendar, one Shemitah after the end of the 9th Jubilee of their Ona age. And when you look that up or compare that to the Gregorian calendar, it comes out to be 32 AD, give or take a year. So really interesting to have those kind of things. So yeah, I think that's definitely referring to it. A lot of times, I use King James mostly, so a lot of times in the King James, it'll talk about the world, and it really means the age. Or like where in Hebrews it says God made the worlds, and it's actually ages. So there's actually the 4 main ages, and there's different prophecies in each. So good questions. Are there any prophecies left that need to be fulfilled before the rapture occurs? Not before the rapture. There's a lot of things, there's several things left before the tribulation. Well, a few. There's a lot of prophecies in the tribulation. So all of that together has to happen before the second coming. The rapture of the church, though, it doesn't seem like there's nothing in the scriptures or the scrolls that say first this, then a catching away. It's just that the catching away start. The catching away is before the beginning of the day of the Lord. 5 seconds or 50 years, don't know. It's just in that time period. So, but no, nothing that says that directly. I'm glad, aren't you? So rapture could actually happen tonight. Okay. I see parallels between Ezekiel 38 and 39 with Revelation. Ezekiel 38 and Revelation 16, Ezekiel 39 and Revelation 19. The island mountains moved. What do you say? I'd have to look at it and study it really well. But there are parallels. There's some people that try to say that, and I'm not sure which one's correct, but they'll talk about 38 and 39 are one Magog war. And it's obviously in context before the tribulation. However, in Revelation, you have the Gog-Magog war that's happening at the end of the millennial reign. So they're obviously at least 2 separate Gog-Magog invasions. Some people, though, have looked at Ezekiel 38 and 39 and tried to find like a break in the two. So 38 might be the one before and 39 is the one in Revelation, or vice versa. I've looked at that a couple of times, but I can see where there could be a break. It's either 2 separate ones or it's repeating itself, but that happens a lot with prophecies. But I'll need to go back to that. I want to look at Ezekiel 36 and 37 with the commentary from the Dead Sea Scrolls, and then go into 38 and 39. And I think we might find a pattern or something. Do you believe the New Jerusalem will be on earth during the millennium or after the millennium? That's one thing that's always, I'm not sure. It seems more like it's saying after, but then at the same time, it talks about the New Jerusalem is there and the sinners can't go into it. People that lie, fornicate, etc., murderers and stuff, they won't be allowed to enter. So that makes it sound like millennial reign, because that's the last time we would have a sin nature in people, as far as we know. In the eternity, we shouldn't have anything like that. So my guess would be during the millennial reign, but there's some scriptures in there that seem to look like both, which means I'm not reading it correctly. completely anyway. Which ancient Bible contains the testaments of the patriarchs, Syrian or Armenian? Trying to think if I have that in a thing real quick. Let me look that up real quick. Go to our network if I'm logged in. Let's see if it'll let me log in here. Okay, it won't let me log in here. Let me pull it up over here. I'm not trying to hide it from you, but let's see. In the network we have there it is. And let's see if I can sign in here. Okay, back up one thing. And yeah, canons of scripture. Let me go in here and look at Orthodox editions. In there we have, well, let me do it. One more thing. Let me just pull it up here. I have too many of these things. Okay, so I'm not logged in. Just like this one over here, I'm not logged in. Yeah. Just so it looks like what you look like or what you would see. So let me go here and here. All right, and then, do that. There we go. So in our network, Facebook and those things started getting really, you couldn't say certain things or you get banned and all that. So I still have a Facebook account, but I haven't been there in who knows how long, because it's just unreliable. I try to send, the other day they said that, they said it was a glitch in their system. But if you talk about Linux or, like DistroWatch, Linux distros and other operating systems, then you're promoting viruses, you're a hacker, that kind of stuff. It goes against community guidelines. They actually started getting rid of all the groups that were Linux groups. So I could see you doing that on purpose for like guns, being Facebook or something like that. But Linux is just weird. It's like having a group about Windows, how to make Windows work better. Well, that's hacking. That could be dangerous. So anyway, it was just kind of strange. So we have in here, we have a thing, Canons of Scriptures, Orthodox editions. So let's see here. So, and we're looking for, where am I at? What's the question? Oh, patriarchs, the 12 patriarchs. Yeah, that should be in here. Okay, it's in the Armenian canon, the Dead Sea Scrolls, and it's mentioned in the Ante-Nicene Fathers. So it'd be the Armenian one. That took me forever to get the answer to. All right, and probably I should have one with everything logged in that I can just throw over there in case that question comes up. So it was Armenian. And that, of course, is just the 12 patriarchs, the 12 kids, because it was found in the Dead Sea Scroll area. The patriarch of the Armenians decided it's good to translate it into Greek and put it in their canon. So, and everybody didn't believe the story because it's too Christian-like. And then when the Dead Sea Scrolls proper were found in the 1940s and on, we found other pieces of the same things. So that pretty much takes care of it. How is Paul talking about a pre-trib rapture when he says, we who are alive, who are left until the coming of the Lord? I want to believe in a pre-trib, but the wording confuses me every time. Yeah, it's just when the Lord comes for us is another way of saying it. So if the Lord only comes once at the second coming, that'd be a post-trib rapture. But he's talking about when the Lord comes for us. So that's basically it. So he's coming for us, or he's coming to set up the kingdom, or he's coming the first coming, or that kind of a thing. So the easiest way to believe it, the timing, I mean, First Thessalonians, you're quoting it there, chapter 4, tells you about it, but it doesn't tell you when. The best thing that I could tell you, other than 2 Thessalonians 2, is Daniel chapter 12, because in Daniel 12 you have a resurrection along with shining ones. So resurrection, rapture. 1 Corinthians 15 tells us the resurrection happens within the twinkling of an eye in the rapture. So they're basically together. So you see the rapture resurrection in Daniel 12, 1260 days to an abomination of desolation. And then you have a 1290-day period to the end. And then there's a 1335 and other things. But that clearly teaches time-wise a pre-tribulational rapture. Plus, if you look at all of the early church fathers, they're pre-tribulational. And there's a few things like that in here. Last week on this thing, we looked at chapters 1 and 2. It didn't give us a lot of detail, but you could clearly see a rapture and then a tribulation period. And we'll see that later on in the book. It's very clear. There's a couple texts about a group of people that have never died. Not the two witnesses, because it's a group of people. They leave, the judgment is poured out, and if you make it through, somehow live through that judgment, you'll see that same group of people return. So there's a whole lot of different ways of describing it and talking about it and the reasons for it. It's just not, it's called rapture in the Latin. It's called the catching away there in the King James. So we do have a book on the rapture that might help explain it to you. Let me go back here. In our bookstore, we have the rapture, the pre-trib rapture. So you can get that on Amazon. So that might help too. And I think we have a few rapture videos on our YouTube channel too. We need to go back and do a complete study with those things. But I hope that helps. What if Revelation 13 was current countries, part of the old Roman Empire, identified by their symbol, like the German leopard, the Russian bear, lion, England, global committee, 10 nations? Well, that's always a possibility. Daniel, it's very clear that those are the old nations. But there's always a possibility that you could have one prophecy and the symbols could point to one thing for that time and another thing for this time. So it's always something to think about on how it might fit together. So German, England, those are definitely the European, so the Holy Roman Empire. Not old Roman Empire, but still, it's the two legs. So, and the United Nations. We all thought that the United Nations was the 10 nations until they went past 10. They eventually got up to 27. So now we're looking at things like the BRICS nations being 10 nations, and other things like that. Although Hippolytus gives us a clue to what a few of them are. So it's a possibility to look at. Do any of the church fathers know who wrote the book of Hebrews? Is it Paul? Yeah, many of them talk about that. The story that they all tell is that Paul wrote the book of Hebrews to a group of Jews, most likely the temple priests, and he wrote it in Hebrew. Okay. Someone else, and they're not sure who, whether it was Clement, Barnabas, or Paul, Luke, or maybe somebody else, but somebody translated the original, which is Hebrew, into Greek. And so they talk about how that's why parts of it sound just like Paul and other parts don't quite sound like him. Well, he's written it in Hebrew and it's been translated into Greek. And then for our purposes, then the Greek is being translated into English. But yeah, they all say that. The one thing they disagree on is they're not sure who actually did the Greek translation. Some of them say it might have been Luke, might have been Barnabas, might have been Clement. So there's a few different stories like that. That's a really good example too of using church history. When you have 3 or 4 different opinions, like who wrote it? Well, Clement, Barnabas, or Luke, or someone else. So they don't know. So we don't know. But if they were all to say, oh, we got records, it was this guy, and every single one of them said this guy, I think those are pretty rock solid we can go on. So, like for instance, Barnabas being buried in one place and he was there until they dug him up and put him somewhere else. So, but there's a lot of medieval garbage to that. So Martin Luther was known to be, he made a comment one time that the Lord only had 12 apostles. So why are 18 of them buried in Germany? And that's just a kind of a joke, but obviously he's saying the relics are not real that they used in the Middle Ages. But yeah, they all agree that Paul wrote Hebrews. And that's interesting too, because some people weren't sure. There's a list throughout all the early church fathers about the genuine books. So these are the ones that we know were written by the apostles. Everybody quoted them from the beginning, and just guaranteed, rock solid. Then there's some others that we think are written by the apostles, but we're not exactly sure. And so some of the churches said, well, if we're not sure, they're disputed. We're not going to have them in our canon. So, for instance, Second Peter was that way. First Peter was written by Peter. Everybody agrees, Peter the apostle. But was Second Peter written by someone else, a different Peter, for instance? That was their take on it. All the old ones say, no, Peter wrote First and Second Peter. Don't worry about it. But others are like, yeah, but it's not in certain canons. We're not sure. The language is different. They do the same thing today, but you can look at a book I wrote when I'm 20 and a book that I write when I'm 60. It's going to be quite a bit different. The language, the style of writing, and all that stuff. But it's still me. So that's a good example, I think, of those. Hopefully I didn't click off on one. Is there a link to the Targums? Yes, I think we have one. Let me go back here. On our Bible study, we should have Bible, maybe? Let's see in here. Yeah, here's the Targums. I need to reorganize that just so I know. So from our main website, biblefacts.org, you go under PDFs, there's Bible. So Bible type PDFs. And we've got the Targum of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And those are the only ones I have there. I do have also Isaiah and the Psalms, and some of the others are kind of hard to find. But like, for instance, they have some interesting things in there. So it'll be like a verse, and if there's any extra commentary, it's tacked onto that verse. So just rather than like we do, notes at the bottom. But one of the ones I like to give an example, in Exodus, it talks about Jacob or somebody, picking up his flock and going over and camping out at the Tower of Edar. And that's all it says in our Bible. In the Targum, it says that he went and camped out at the Tower of Edar, which is where the Messiah's appearing will first take place. And you go back and you try to find Edar, the tower is not there anymore, but it's the area of Bethlehem and Bethlehem area and Jerusalem. So it's where the flocks of the temple sacrifices would have been held, close to Jerusalem. And so the very first people to know about Messiah's first coming, according to Matthew and the Synoptic Gospels, was the shepherds that were abiding their flocks in the fields by night, presumably by the temple or by the tower where it used to be the Tower of Edar. So it's just interesting. That's not something that somebody would make up and put in there wanting to be anti-Christian. So, you know what I'm saying? So that's kind of interesting there. So there's a lot of stuff like that in there. Isaiah 53, they say, well, that's probably either Israel atoning for its own sins or Isaiah, or, there's a couple different ideas. Well, the Targum clearly says it's Messiah suffering for the sins of the people. No doubt about it. It actually says the Messiah. So again, it's in the Targum part, so in the extra. But so you can get at least some of those there. You might have already discussed this, but what is your opinion about the legend that Jesus came as a teenager with Joseph of Arimathea to Britain, Glastonbury, because, Joseph was an exporter, in tin. Those are part of a series of old legends that seem to be legitimate. I know we have this legend amongst ourselves that Jesus never traveled out of the country and that kind of stuff. But there's quite a bit of a history to it. There's even some really old Catholic legends about it, which really makes it interesting to me, because if Jesus did that, and Glastonbury was one of the first places where they became Christian, Kingdom of Siluria definitely was, according to the Roman archives. That's why Christians became the enemy, and Paul was executed in 67 because of Caractacus and all that stuff that happened. So that being the case, that would make England the primary seat. So if Rome says, you have to obey us because we have the seat of Peter, England can simply say, no, you have to obey us because we have the little shack that Jesus made while he was here. And his uncle we were the first ones. We were the first ones to send out missionaries, all that kind of stuff. So the Catholics, above all, would want to say, no, that never happened. And in reality, it doesn't matter. The church fathers make it clear that we don't care whose seat you're sitting in. What we care about is, are you teaching the same thing that they taught? So maybe, the Catholics are sitting in the seat of St. Peter. If that was true, fine, whatever. Does the current Pope teach the gospel the way that Peter taught it? And if yes, then that's fine. If no, there's a problem. So that's the way that the church fathers looked at it. In the beginning, that was really important because if I said something that sounded fishy, but I could show you that my father used to have dinner with Jesus and Peter, way back when, that would give me more authority than the guy down the street that never saw anything. So we should pay attention to apostolic authority in that sense for the first and second generations. But after that, nobody ever saw Messiah. So your guess is as good as mine. So after 2 generations, apostolic authority ceases to mean anything. And the question is, are you teaching what the book is teaching? Or are you talking about a Christ consciousness or some other weird thing? So, yeah, my opinion, I don't think we can prove it one way or the other. There's no prophecies per se in it, but there's some interesting, old legends. Along with that idea is that when the Catholic version says when persecution came up, several of the apostles and the people that they kept company with took off and went to France and then to Spain and then to England because that was the route, the tin route. And Mary, Martha, and Lazarus ended up being in France. And supposedly, according to one of those legends, he died again, and is buried under in a really a crypt kind of thing under the cathedral at Marseille. And supposedly he took with him 2 stones, like, yay big, 2 stones from his first tomb. And they were buried in the second tomb with him. And he supposedly wrote a book, which would be fantastic to find, but it's one of those things that's missing. Either it never really existed or somebody doesn't want us to see it. But anyway, there's a lot of ancient history like that, and there's no reason not to believe it unless there's another legend that contradicts it. I mean, that's what I would think. And the only people that really wouldn't want this would be Roman Catholics. Now, again, we could say England might get kind of uppity and say, well, so you need to be Anglican, just do what you're told. But again, it applies the same way. Is the King of England and the Anglican Church teaching the Bible the very clear way that it should be? Are they following Peter and Paul and those things? And the people that knew them directly wrote many, many sermons. So you know what Paul meant. So are they teaching it? When you go to church and they teach something totally opposite scripture, doesn't matter who they are. We're not participating. But yeah, it's a fascinating study. There are several manuscripts kind of like that from the 1st century that we need to probably become experts in, and we'll be teaching those in the future too. Are you aware that Jesus also came from a priestly line based on Luke 1:5? Yeah, there's several prophecies in the Dead Sea Scrolls that he would be from the lineage of Judah and Levi, which I think is pretty interesting. And people ask about that because it's like Mary's cousin was Martha, who was married to Zacharias, and he was a priest. And it's like, well, that could be multiple things. That one girl from the tribe of Judah could have simply married a guy from Levi. And of course, that family would be Levi at that point. So that happened a lot anyway, but that's, there's several things like that. So yeah, it's pretty interesting to look at. What is the difference between reading the New King James or the King James Bible for understanding? I read the New King James rather, and feel really happy with it. Yeah, I think it's one of the better translations. I've never understood the Bible as well since I got the New King James Bible. Well, keep using it. That's a really good one. Everybody wants to nitpick on things. The main thing is you have a received text in Greek and a critical text. So basically what that means is people have found a bunch of different manuscripts. Some of them are missing verses. And they assume if it's shorter, it must be the original, because they always assume the bigger ones are just because somebody added to it, which could be. You don't know for sure, just as a book. So then there's the shortened version and the long version. So the long version is the received text. So that would be the King James, the New King James. I think there's 13 Bibles that are the received text. All the other Bibles, like the NRSV, NIV, RSV, a lot of those, a lot of the easier to read Bibles, all have those verses cut out. So the question is, did someone cut them out or did someone put them in? Which set of text should we be using? And the oldest manuscript, they don't lie to you. The oldest manuscript really doesn't have some of those verses. But when you go to the early church fathers that are about 100 years before the earliest full Bible that we have, the earliest full Bible we have is from the 4th century, the 350s. That's the Sinaiticus and the Vaticanus and a few others. That's the earliest full Bible. But when you go back to the early church fathers, they have sermons and they'll quote lots and lots of scripture, and they will quote some of these missing verses. So it is absolutely impossible for you to quote something that hasn't been written yet, that somebody's going to stick in there. So their versions had those missing verses at least 100 to 150 years before the oldest full Bible that we have. So with that in mind, I mean, you can debate it, and most of it doesn't make much difference. Like they'll talk about the blood of Christ, say, healing us or something, maybe in 10 different verses, and we're missing 3 or 4 of them. The concept is still there, but it's just a dangerous thing to take away from Scripture. So I always recommend people to use King James, New King James. When you get my books, they'll almost always be New King or Old King James, mainly because I don't have to pay a royalty when I quote it. Because if I quote over 500 verses, I have to pay them something. So, but either one of those. And I think the MEV is also one. And we should have a list of that on there, those that are recommended. And when you get a Bible study program, you almost always have for free a King James, Old King James, that's keyed to Strong. So if you want to do word studies, you can always get a Bible program and do it off of the King James, which is easy to do. You just look at your version and see, you can tell what word we're looking for, what the King James calls it. We don't care what the King James calls it, but we just find it. And then you're able to click on it and look it up in Greek and do a word study. So really important to be able to do that stuff, especially when it comes to the prophecies, because the prophecies, you change one word and now the vision I think I'm seeing is totally different somewhere else. So question, do you know if the Essenes participated in the sacrificial system? Yes, they did. If they did they go to the temple in Jerusalem or did they do something else? For a while, they went to the temple of Jerusalem. Some people went back and forth. Some of the priests that were hardcore absolutely refused, and they would do the sacrifices at the Alexandrian temple. They had their own temple down in Egypt, which is where they went while the wars were going on, the Pharisee-Sadducee wars. And then after Rome took over, created a peace. Nobody kills anybody or you get shot on the spot. And that created a peace. And then they were able to come back in and they took Qumran as their headquarters to start teaching the gospel as they knew it. And according to Josephus, the vast majority of people followed the Essene way. They had respect to the Sadducees and the Pharisees because it was the ruling government at the time, but everybody knew they were corrupt. So yeah, they did that. There's actually part of the text in the Damascus covenant, and it's called the Damascus covenant because it's used that way. They called Qumran Damaskik, which would be the, or Damascus, which is the, means the house of the blood heir. So it's like the true followers of the Messiah. And they called themselves Yahad, which is ones led by the Spirit of God. So anyway, fascinating study to look at their history and their theology and stuff. Their theology matches perfectly with the New Testament. The only thing that we're really curious about is their views on the end times, their herbal medicine, so we can live long and healthy and prosper. And also their prophecies, very, very important, which is what we're studying now. Reading Revelation 17:12, in the Greek, it seems to me, hold on a second. There we go. I clicked on something. Reading Revelation 17:12 in the Greek, it seems to me that the 10 kings will not receive power as kings until the Antichrist gives it to them. That could be. There's a couple of different ways of looking at it. Either they form like an empire, but they can never come to a decision because 5 of them are one way and 5 another. Maybe they have to have a majority to do anything, so they can't flat do anything. In our country, we have Republicans and Democrats in government. And so many times it seems like, I'll be nice, one party, I think you know what I'm talking about, one party will actually say, okay, what's the other party say? Are they for or against it? They're for it, then I'm against it. It's almost like they don't care about what the people want. It's just in order to be different, so they might actually be able to get into power, much like the Sadducees in the Testament of Nahum, or the commentary on Nahum gives you that stuff too. But anyway, so if that's the case, so in our case, a lot of times we're stalemated because if it's 50-50 and one wants to do it and one doesn't, nothing ever gets done. So if we were to have 3 or 5, some odd number of people, and say like each group would vote, I'm going to do it or not do it, and then come together and you'd have the 5 votes from the 5 factions or something, as long as it was as an odd number, something would happen every time. There'd be no stalemates. So to me, it looks like these 10 kings, for whatever reason, just nobody is in a position of power to make it happen. Do what I tell you or I'll kill you. The army's coming. So nobody can do that. So they're just too democratic and nothing ever gets done. But when the Antichrist comes to power, he quickly annihilates 3 of them, being the 8th out of the 7, and makes his will work, period. And it says that the Lord puts into the hearts of all the kings to attack and destroy Babylon. So that's one of the great delusions that comes. So yeah, you could look at it that way, that they come together, but they can't do anything until he takes them over, or he comes on the scene and starts the 10 nations. So in either case, the early church fathers taught not to look for the Antichrist, or, in other words, some guy whose name equals 666, because there's always a handful of those. So don't even look for that until you see Rome split into 2, which was 395 AD, and then fall, and then out of that, 10 nations arise. So when you see a 10-nation confederacy calling itself Rome, or saying we inherited Rome or something like that, then you start looking for an 11th one who's a king north of Israel, whose name equals 666, and you'd be able to figure it out. So it's an interesting thing to look at, so I'm not exactly sure. What is your favorite book of the Bible? Probably Daniel, because of the prophecies. The baptism of Jesus would be his ordination as a Melchizedek priest. Okay, excuse the spelling. John the Baptist acting as a priest. Yeah, actually, we have a record of Hippolytus, church history record, that gives us the school of the prophets, and they're run by usually prophet people, from Moses' time all the way up to when Annas and Caiaphas stole it. And it's an interesting description. They have Zacharias the priest, father of John the Baptist, as one. He handed it over to some guy named Joseph or something, not anybody in the New Testament, but just some guy. And then he died, and Caiaphas and Annas usurped it and said, we're taking it over now. Well, everybody agrees they're not worthy, so that doesn't work that way. So you'd back up to Joseph, and apparently he had no children. So then you back up to Zacharias, he had one child, John the Baptist. So it would naturally fall to him. And they said that someone of their order would be the one to fulfill the prophecy of making straight the path to lead in Messiah, the quote out of Isaiah. And John the Baptist in John said he was the one that did that, to make straight the ways of the Messiah. So it's definitely that way. So he actually was who should have been, if everything was going properly, should have been the proper high priest. Let's just say he was the proper high priest, not the guy in the temple at the time, in the Jerusalem temple, because it was apostate. So you've got a priest of that lineage baptizing someone who's born of the tribe of Judah, of the proper lineage, as king. So he's born king, baptized into priesthood. And normally in the Old Testament, when any king tried to usurp the priesthood, he got leprosy and died. I mean, the Lord would kill him flat, because that's their way of saying, I am the Messiah, and become a false Messiah at that point. But Jesus was born king, baptized into priesthood, and immediately it says the Holy Spirit light upon him as a dove, making him prophet. So that restored the Melchizedekian order from the Levitical order. So we have all of that data in our book. Go back here again. Ancient Order of Melchizedek. So this one right here, all from the scrolls. Fantastic history. And it really explains Hebrews 4-7 in great detail. You get the general idea anyway. You don't really need it, but it just helps to fill in the gaps. What or who is a Calvinist? I don't know what that means. Basically, there are Arminians and Calvinists. And Calvinists, for whatever reason, believe that you don't have the free will to accept Jesus as your Savior. So God will, for lack of a better term, force people to be saved, and he will not force other people to be saved. So in other words, just the ones that he picked, that he wants saved, are the ones that are saved. And you really don't have any choice in the matter. And that's called, there's 5 basic ideas. There's unconditional, oh boy, it's been a while. Unconditional election, irresistible grace, perseverance of the saints, total depravity, and limited atonement. So it's basically, we're totally depraved. We can't choose salvation. So he limits the atonement to only those that he chooses. And the grace is irresistible. You can't say no because you can't say yes. So that's kind of the Calvinistic. So you'll have Calvinists in everything. There'll be Calvinistic Baptists, Calvinistic Pentecostals, Calvinistic whatever. The Reformed Church is Calvinist. The opposite of that is an Arminian. And an Arminian would say that we can't do what's necessary to save ourselves, is what the Bible means. So if Jesus died for our sins and made that possible, and now says all you have to do is accept the free gift, we accept the free gift. The Holy Spirit helps us to be able to understand, and we make a choice to either be saved or not saved. So that's the difference. It sounds really horrible when you put it on paper, but the early church fathers called the Calvinistic idea the predestination part, that before you were even born, God picked some to go to heaven and some to go to hell. That kind of a predestination, they call that Valentinian Gnosticism, which is talked about a lot. Now, a hyper-Arminian which actually a Pelagian is someone who says, I was born sinless and I don't need a savior. That's Basilidian Gnosticism, according to the church fathers. So if you say you don't need a savior, you're wrong. If you say, I'm saved if God wants me saved, so I can go do what I want anyway, no, you're wrong. You're not saved. Those two, you can't understand and be saved in those two things. You have to understand the gospel properly. Not saying that a Calvinist can't be saved. I'm saying the doctrines are in error. Let you know. Anyway, so if you know about Calvary chapels, then I'm an open book. That's me. Is that why they took Jesus to Egypt after he was born until he came to the temple at the age of 12? Yes, most likely. I mean, if you were going to go to some place that would accept the Messiah and protect him, it'd be the Essenes. And they had already had a group back, but when Herod's trying to kill people and the angel tells you to flee, you don't just go to Qumran, which is down the street. That's probably not going to work. So the angel said flee. That means flee, get out of town, somewhere where Herod's authority is not technically supreme. The people in Qumran would have fought to the death for him. It's their responsibility to always carry a weapon, and you don't fight against the government. So if Rome wants to do something, you let Rome do whatever Rome wants to do, because they're supposed to be there according to the prophecies. May not like it, but that's the way it is. But when someone else attacks, they even record a time when the high priest of Jerusalem sent temple priests down to seize Jesus, who was preaching in Qumran at the time. That did not end well. So really interesting stories like that. And I think that's really why Jesus was telling them not to take a bunch of money, or just take the cloak, the little things that you need, and make sure you have at least a sword between they went out 2 by 2. Somebody, at least one of you, should have a sword, because there's bandits. That's just what happens. And everybody, usually says, well, no, that's not biblical. And it was just because to fulfill a prophecy. Well, that's probably true too. It's probably both ways. But that was, you don't say to fulfill a prophecy, I want to make sure you get drunk and fornicate. And normally that's bad, but this is just to fulfill a prophecy. So it was a normal thing. Pharisees and Sadducees usually didn't, but Essenes usually did. They were patriots, in other words. But yeah, since the temple was down there, Josephus, and not Antiquities, Wars of the Jews, the last book, records the closing of the Essene temple under Titus. So Titus went through, because of all the problems the Jews caused, destroyed the Jerusalem temple in 70 AD. And then to finish it up, he came down to Alexandria, or the outskirts where the temple was, and would have done the same thing, except they welcomed him in. He said, by order, I'm shutting this place down. Fine, it's shut down. That was 73. That was 2 years before the end of the age. I'm sure they were jumping at the bit, so to speak, to do this, because in 2 years, the age changes and this stuff stops. And now the Lord has had, the king come and tell me, no, it stops now. Great, it stops now. Up until that time, they were doing the sacrifices and the rituals and stuff as per Moses, because that's what they're supposed to do. But then at that time, most of them just became missionaries in the church because they believed in the Messiah. So actually, I should take that back. I don't know if they continued sacrifices after 32 or not, but the temple rituals were there. They continued operating in the temple, at least. Fascinating to look at. Since Jesus and the others in the New Testament seem to quote from the Septuagint, would I correctly be assuming that it is a good translation of the Old Testament? It was. Yeah, according to the church fathers, it was a perfect translation in Greek. We have King James only people now that think that the King James is an inspired translation, in English. I don't necessarily believe that. Some people do. But they seem to think that the Holy Spirit inspired the Greek version also. So the Greek version was a perfect copy, just in Greek instead of Hebrew, of the scriptures. However, the church fathers talk about there were at least 3 people, Symmachus, Aquila, and Theodore, that were heretics. Long story short, they wrote their own versions by cutting things out, not adding things in, I might mention. So they cut things out of that. So, and later on, they all got garbled. So it's not a cultic version now. It's just missing pieces in some copies because the other guys cut it out and nobody remembers what. So Origen's hexapla will kind of show all the differences to that. So yes, it should have been perfect. There was a guy named Lucius. Was it Lucius? Lucian, that did a perfect Greek translation, like in the, I think, late or first or early second century, of the Old and the New Testament all put together. So that was interesting too. We don't have that anymore either, but besides the numbering. So yeah, so there are problems in the Septuagint today, but we wouldn't want to throw it out because it does have some interesting things. So for instance, when Isaiah says a virgin will conceive and bear a son, and that's Jesus, a lot of people will say it just means young woman. It doesn't mean virgin. And in reality, in the Septuagint, it uses a word that only means virgin. It cannot mean young woman. And of course, when you look in the Testament of Nathan, plus the Dead Sea Scrolls and the commentary on the Dead Sea Scrolls, commentaries and stuff, they make it very clear it's virgin. So it's pretty interesting that way. Okay, our last question. When John was imprisoned, why did he send his disciples to ask if Jesus was the one when he knew that when he baptized him? I think he was asking if he's the only one. The Essenes taught, just as we know now, that there's one Messiah with 2 comings. But the Pharisees and Sadducees taught 2 Messiahs. Okay. And so he probably had the idea that Jesus would, fix everything. Maybe it's, two separate Messiahs, one Messiah, 2 comings, or maybe it's something else is going on. So he just wanted to ask for sure, are you the only one? And this is the first coming, or should we look for another coming or another Messiah? That's the question. And he basically said, go back and tell them that you see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's 5 things that he's doing. And the funny part about that is 4 of those 5 are in different verses in the Old Testament, but one of them, which is raising the dead, is not specifically mentioned anywhere in the Old Testament. But there is a Dead Sea Scroll that says when Messiah comes, he will do, and it gives a list. Jesus was quoting that list perfectly. John the Baptist, being a Essene and someone running the school of the prophets, would have been very familiar with that. So when Jesus said, go tell him that I did 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, Jesus is saying the prophecies are real, the studies on the prophecies and the scrolls are real. You baptized me. You know what the correct answer is. Don't second guess yourself. I mean, I can guarantee you if Jesus appeared right here in front of me, I firmly believe a pre-trib rapture, but I'd be like, just to make sure, pre-trib? Right, okay. Can you lose your salvation or not? Okay. Did the gifts of the Spirit still can? That's what I thought. Oh, what about, I'd be doing that with everything. I'm positive I'm right. I just want to know. And if it didn't look like it was happening the way I think it should happen, I'd be asking questions. And I think that's really all he was doing. I don't think he was doubting his faith or anything else, just simply saying, were we right? Are you the only one? Or is there another one? Are you, just FYI, just let me know. And Jesus basically said, no, that's the correct way of looking at it. So fascinating. We'll go ahead and stop there for tonight. Come back next week and we'll pick up with the middle of chapter 4. And there's read ahead if you want to, but there's a really interesting set of numbers. He asks, okay, well, if this is the case, when is the end? Well, I can't tell you that. And then he says, well, how about basic time periods? Can you give me a hint? And the angel gives him a hint. So we'll look at that. So anyway, thank you guys, and we will see you next week. God bless.